Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and this is the Broken Meeple, a show where I rave and rant about board games, but it's usually more the ranting part. This is an expansion video. We're looking at Underwater Cities Data Era as it's called, and if you know my channel and you've watched it over the years, you'll know that Underwater Cities is probably, I would say, my favourite game that Vladimir Suhi has done. It's, I'm very much hit and miss with his designs. Some of them I really like. I mean, I love Pulsar 2849 and I love Underwater Cities. In fact, come to think of it, I think those two might be tossing for which one I like most, actually. Both of those I really enjoy. But I have reviewed a bunch of Vladimir stuff in the past that I haven't gravitated towards as much. Some of the other designs have been like, it's alright, or just not particularly like them. So it is definitely a hit and miss affair. But for some reason, Underwater Cities just kind of clicked with me. I love the card tableau play of trying to do the location actions, which are very tight. It's a very tight worker placement game, but also trying to match the colours of the cards you're playing in order to get more bonuses, chain them, and all that lot. It sort of kind of feels a bit like one of those, you don't get many turns, but you try to do more combos. But I feel like you do enough turns in the game to warrant what it is you're trying to do, and you do get production phases, and you do feel like you get a lot of stuff at times, even though it is a tight game at the end of the day. So I don't feel it's as restrictive as some of those other ones. Well, we've had an expansion already, and what was it called? New Discoveries. And that one basically just added dual layer boards, which you really did need. The quick start rules, which are essential for this game. Jesus Christ, it is a long game, especially with 4 players. I ideally don't like playing this with 4 players because of how long it is, but if needs must, use the quick start rule. So it basically skips the first round, puts you into round 2, and you get on with it. And then the museum board, I can take or leave it. I found that kind of meh. I don't really use it. So really, the first expansion was mostly just better boards, quick start, and storage space. And even with a folded space insert, sadly, it can't cater for the Data Era expansion. Not without some jiggery pokery anyway. You've got to merge some stuff and be a little bit creative. But it can just about work. You've got 2 boxes, what the hell. So what is Data Era? Well, Data Era is a small box expansion that, doesn't add a huge amount to the pile, but what it does is quite a sizable change. You essentially now get to deal with discs, data discs, or basically CD-ROMs. I mean, everybody when we play this game jokes about how we're using advanced technology to build underwater cities, and yet we're dealing with what is essentially CD-ROMs. So we do like to make that a little bit of a comparison, but it's basically a new resource. So you can build data centers, data actual domes, which are blue domes. These score points for having lots of blue domes multiplied by having a set of all the 4 different types of buildings. Wait a minute, 4? There's only 3. Well, now there's 4, because now you get the blue ones. You actually get to make, I forget what they're called, I don't know, server labs, data centers, that kind of thing. And basically, these are just like any other building, so you build them in a similar manner to the other one. They cost CDs in order to make. And you can build these alongside all your other buildings, and these produce more CD-ROMs over the game. So what exactly do you actually use these CD-ROMs for? Well, you've got a few things you could use them for, because they basically updated all the reference aids. So all the reference aids have got revised production costs and costs for all these new things, which is great, because it means that you can chuck away, well, not chuck away because, well, we'll get onto that later, but certainly you can play with the appropriate reference aid for your game. But you also get revised reference aids that not only show you how the scoring is updated for them, but they have a bunch of costs that you can do. So basically, with these CD-ROMs, you can, once a term, pay CD-ROMs in order to actually, why am I calling them CD-ROMs? CDs, whatever. You can pay CDs in order to actually do various effects. Now, some of these effects are fairly small things, so I can build on the expansion site. If I spend half a disc, you actually get them in halves, which is kind of weird. You can exchange a resource for another resource. You can draw more cards. So it gives you a little bit of flexibility if you're really struggling for certain things. But the main thing that you can do with them is, depending on the color of the card, the cost is different. You can play additional cards. So normally you just go to a location and you play 1 card. But if, for example, I've got a spare disc present and spend that, I can play a red card on addition to the card I've already played. So you're effectively able to trigger more cards during the game in general, and thus get more bonuses and do more stuff. You will replenish your hand after playing those cards, so it's not like you fall short. So it's just a case of, if you have a bunch of these discs handy, you can actually play more cards during the game, build up your engine, do some more crazy combo stuff. And That, for the most part, is essentially what the expansion gives you. You do get a few little bits of, a couple of extra metropolises, a new quick start tile, some new cards that you just mix into the deck, some new government contracts, just basically a few things that you throw in. And they do at least have to give you some new tiles to cover some of the spaces on the board with. So depending what player count you're playing with, it will tell you which tiles and which spaces to cover up. A little annoying because obviously they can get knocked around and stuff, but I mean, what else are you going to do apart from print an entirely new board? So this is a cost-effective way of doing it, but it just means that you do have to tailor the board slightly if you are playing with this expansion. Now, it's had a lot of buzz from people who have played it, and I gotta say, it is a mixed bag. It's definitely, I think, more good than bad. I mean, overall, it's a fun expansion. I like the idea that now I've got this 4th building to make, and they even give you new double building components now. So you remember how the first expansion fixed it with the dual layer boards? Well, now this one fixes it by giving you double buildings. So now the upgraded buildings are a single piece, and you haven't got to do this weird balancing act with all these different upgrade buildings that you did in the past. That is a godsend in itself. But having the 4th building is great. Another option. Having another dome that you can build and another way to score points and all these different things that you can do for discs is all good. I enjoy it, especially the idea that I can play new cards, because the card aspect is my favorite part of the game. So telling me that I can play more cards is always a good thing. But it's a double-edged sword because on the one hand, great, more options, more points, more everything. The problem though is more time, downtime, AP, the works. Yeah, this is an expansion that's a little bit cumbersome to use, especially with new players. I played a 4-player game of this, teaching 3 new players, and I threw in the expansion.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Oh boy, that was a long game. And I have tried solo and smaller games and more familiar players as well, but the fact of the matter is that this adds a lot more options that you can do because of these discs. And so new players are going to struggle on an AP front because they're going to have a lot of stuff to consider, but also the overall length of the game is increased. This kind of a bit like how, if you imagine that the quick start rules do what Prelude did to Terraforming Mars, they shortened the game, which was a great thing. This is doing to Underwater Cities what Colonies did for Terraforming Mars, which was to eradicate the fact that you made it quicker and now you've made it longer again. This one does the same thing. Because you can do more actions on your turn, it means more stuff's going off, more stuff is triggering, more stuff, the turns take longer in the game overall, and there isn't a compensator for this. You still play the same number of rounds. Thankfully, you can use this with the quick start rules, so at least, you're not having to play the full-length game if you use this expansion, but man, it does add to the length. And this isn't exactly a short game. I mean, even with the quick start rules, you're talking a 3-hour plus game with 4 players. It's kind of ridiculous. 4 players really is, I think, too long for this game. 3 players is definitely the best sweet spot, but then even 2 players pretty sweet. And solo's not bad. But it's just 4 just gets a lot. And this is not helping with that. Regardless of what player count you play it as, is going to add to the length. You're probably adding a good 5 to 10 minutes per player for using this expansion, which means your 3-hour game could easily go to 3.5 without even realizing, and it's just, that's a long time for this game. I do wish it was shorter, when you've got all the stuff that you produce and everything. And that's also the other problem, because you might think, well, it's just occasional new cards. That can't be the only reason. Production phases take a lot longer in this. Because you're playing more cards, people have a lot more stuff in front of them. So, the game we played last time, there were so many different production cards and passive effect cards and God knows what else in front of players, that when it came to the production phase, I mean, your scores are going to be probably higher in this game because you can achieve more, but it means that there's more stuff going off, which means you've got even more of a mental maths exercise when trying to sort out, right, hang on, so I'm producing all this, so I need to get all this, right, to produce all this, and I need to get all of this and all this, all this, and now the data CDs are making all this, I can get to choose a resource, or which one do I want to choose? Guess I'll choose that one, alright, we'll go with it. And then this card is triggering, I'm getting some of those, and this card is triggering, I'm getting some of those, and it just goes on and on. Multiply that by 3 to 4 players, and again, it adds to the fiddliness of the game and adds to the length. So this is an expansion that I would be hesitant to pull out with new players. In fact, I would dare say you probably only want to pull this out with veteran players, and even then be wary at 4, because it is going to make the game exceedingly long. Unless you've got people who don't think about their turns and will just go like Speedy Gonzalez, you'll be okay. In terms of actually removing the expansion parts, that's relatively straightforward, thankfully. I mean, you will have to go through the decks and find the cards that relate to data CDs. That's going to be a bit of a problem. You'd have to go through and constantly find them, or you'd have to say to people, look, if you see a card that has that symbol on it, discard it, draw a new one. That's probably the easier way of doing it. You can just keep the original reference aids that you had so that you don't have anything referencing data stuff on there, so that would be easy enough. You start with a personal assistant that gives you a data CD, so you just don't start with that, that's fine. And you just use the original scoring card that doesn't deal with the fact you've got a 4th building. And of course you can just ignore blue and blue. So it is relatively easy to extract this expansion from the game if you don't want to use it, aside from just having to tell people to discard certain cards as you go through the game. And there's not that many. I mean, you only get so many new cards in this. What do you get? You get 7 new tiles from Metropolis, 48 new cards. Bear in mind that is spread among the decks. So yeah, occasionally you're going to have to say to people, look, if you see this, get rid of it. And it's not like every single card relates to the data discs. Some of them don't. They're just more cards, more effects. So only occasionally it's going to be a problem. So thankfully, yes, you can say, we're not going to play with data error, like I'm teaching new players, we've got 4 of us, I'll be like, yeah, you know what, we can leave this out, that's fine. But if you've got 3 of you max that know what they're doing and don't take forever, this is still a very fun expansion to include because of the extra options that it's giving you. And if you are very familiar with the game, it's not too difficult to include. It's not that much of a rules teach either, considering that a lot of the stuff is pretty well explained on your reference stuff anyway. So, there is that caveat to mention. I mean, it mentions 40 minutes a player here on the expansion thing. It was already 40 minutes a player in the base game, let alone 40 minutes now. It is easy like 50 minutes a player, potentially an hour per player if you've got 4 of you and, there's new players and stuff. So it's a little bit insane. So overall, I do like the expansion, just that negative is a problem. I would give it an 8 out of 10 overall. It is a great expansion from a gameplay perspective. That big negative, though, stops it being one that I can give a distinction level to, because, like I say, it really does have a bit of a compounding effect there. It's a little expensive for what it is as well. I remember this costing a fair whack at Essen, for the stuff that you get in here, but having the double buildings is nice, and having some domes and a few tiles and that. It's, like I say, there's a reasonable amount of content in this box, but it is fairly pricey for an expansion, I thought. So, you're paying the money for it, but if you're a fan of the game, I highly recommend it. If you're just a casual player of the game, maybe not so much. It is going to take it to a whole new level that you're probably not necessarily geared for, especially if you don't play this game very often or you're constantly teaching new players. Then I might say you don't desperately need this expansion, but as I say, if you're like me and love the game, I think you're going to get a lot of good stuff out of here as well. So that's it from me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the review page on the website. Check out the rest of my content. I have got a bucket load of reviews to record this week, so I hope you'll tune in for them. We've got Echoes of Time, Limit, Take Time, Walking in Osaka, and plenty more still to come. So, yep, I'm certainly going to be busy. So take care, and remember, regardless of whether you believe we can run this underwater city on what is essentially Atari discs, it's still only a game, so bye for now.